When global conflict spreads, markets tighten. Trade slows, supply narrows, confidence weakens. But something unexpected happens. Certain gemstones don't collapse. They react. Across decades of observing gemstone markets through recessions, supply shocks, and geopolitical strain, one pattern remains consistent. Not all stones respond the same way. Some react when trade routes constrict. Some move when extraction zones destabilize. A few strengthen when capital seeks portability. And one rises because the world already recognizes it. This is not speculation. It is structural behavior. Over the next few minutes, the reaction will unfold in 4 escalating layers, from subtle logistical tremors to full systemic pressure. The question is simple. When uncertainty peaks, does value move toward rarity, portability, or recognition? Let's begin where instability always begins, with movement. Ranked 10th, amber, the first signal of fractured trade. Long before markets panic, logistics tighten. History shows that during periods of global instability, the earliest disruptions rarely appear in stock exchanges or commodity charts. They begin in quieter places: shipping manifests, insurance premiums, customs delays, maritime rerouting. When movement becomes uncertain, materials dependent on narrow corridors feel pressure first. Amber is one of those materials. Unlike crystalline gemstones formed under tectonic force, amber originates as resin, prehistoric tree sap hardened and fossilized over tens of millions of years. The most commercially significant deposits lie around the Baltic Sea region. For centuries, this geography shaped an entire trade network, known historically as the Amber Road, linking Northern Europe to Mediterranean markets. That concentration matters. When Baltic shipping lanes experience instability, whether from naval restriction, sanctions, regional tension, or rising insurance costs, amber supply does not vanish, but it slows. Dealers hesitate. Export timing stretches. Pricing becomes cautious. Even minor disruptions can amplify scarcity perception because the road itself is concentrated. Across multiple periods in the 20th century, amber availability fluctuated sharply during times of restricted maritime movement. Not because deposits disappeared, not because demand exploded overnight, but because confidence in transport weakened. Markets respond quickly to friction. Amber is lightweight, easily stored, and culturally embedded across Europe and parts of Asia. Yet it is not universally liquid in the way diamonds are. Its value depends more heavily on route reliability and regional networks. That makes it highly sensitive to early-stage instability. There is also a psychological dimension often overlooked. Amber carries warmth and organic texture. It is ancient but not ostentatious. In uncertain times, materials perceived as natural and historical often regain symbolic appeal. They feel grounded, anchored in deep time. Still, amber does not dominate during global conflict. It does not surge across every market simultaneously. Instead, it acts as a signal, a precursor, a subtle indicator that trade arteries are constricting. And subtle indicators often matter more than dramatic ones. Consider this carefully. When instability begins, which shifts first? Headline markets or the movement of physical goods? Those who observe supply corridors often see changes before broader panic emerges. If experience in collecting, trading, or studying gemstones has revealed similar patterns, share that perspective. Observational insight adds depth to understanding these cycles. Because amber teaches a quiet lesson, instability is first measured in movement. And this is only the outermost layer of how gemstones respond when global systems strain. Ranked 9th. Lapis Lazuli, when power seeks symbol over substance. If amber signals that trade routes are tightening, lapis lazuli reveals something deeper. It shows what happens when instability begins to reshape authority itself. For over 6,000 years, the most prized lapis lazuli has come from a single mountainous region in what is now Afghanistan. Unlike many gemstones that enjoy diversified global sourcing, fine lapis has historically depended on a narrow and difficult supply corridor. Caravans once carried it across deserts and empires. Later, modern transport systems replaced camel routes, but the geographic concentration remained. When regional stability falters, access narrows. And when access narrows, symbolism intensifies. Lapis lazuli has never been valued solely for brilliance or rarity. Its deep ultramarine blue, often flecked with pyrite like suspended gold dust, became the color of royalty, divinity, and sacred authority in ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Renaissance Europe. Ground into pigment, it produced ultramarine, once more expensive than gold, and reserved for the most significant artistic commissions. That historical association matters during periods of global tension. When systems strain, institutions instinctively reinforce visual signals of legitimacy and permanence. Throughout history, materials tied to power imagery tend to experience renewed demand. Not always in mass markets, but within elite and symbolic contexts. Lapis does not react the way speculative assets do. It does not spike wildly on rumor. Instead, it moves with shifts in cultural emphasis. When stability feels uncertain, the desire for visible continuity grows stronger. There is also an overlooked economic layer. Because high-quality lapis remains geographically concentrated, supply constraints can emerge quickly when regional logistics tighten. Even modest disruption can elevate perception of rarity. But lapis operates differently from amber. Amber responds to shipping friction. Lapis responds to authority tension. It represents a shift from logistical instability to psychological signaling. Consider this. When uncertainty rises, does society lean more heavily on symbols of power and tradition? And if so, which materials quietly benefit from that shift? Share a perspective below, especially if historical art, architecture, or ceremonial objects reveal patterns that connect material choice to periods of upheaval. Often, symbolism changes before markets fully understand why. Because lapis lazuli teaches a distinct lesson. When control feels fragile, symbols become heavier, and the stones tied to those symbols rarely go unnoticed. Ranked 8th. Jade. When wealth needs to move quietly. When instability deepens beyond trade friction and symbolic tension, behavior changes. Movement becomes selective, liquidity becomes cautious, and wealth begins to look for form. Jade occupies a unique position in this shift. Unlike gemstones, whose value is defined primarily by global auction houses, jade, particularly nephrite and high-grade jadeite, has functioned for centuries as culturally embedded wealth. In parts of East Asia, it has represented moral virtue, continuity, status, and financial security simultaneously. Its value is not only market-driven, it is tradition-reinforced. That distinction becomes critical during prolonged instability. When currencies fluctuate or confidence in formal systems softens, assets that are compact, durable, and culturally recognized often gain renewed attention. Jade fits this profile precisely. It is dense, resilient, easily transported, and in many regions, deeply trusted. Historically, during periods of political uncertainty in East Asia, jade objects moved across families, borders, and generations with remarkable fluidity. Not as speculative instruments, but as quiet stores of preserved value. There is also a supply component. High-quality jadeite is geographically concentrated, most notably in Myanmar. When regional logistics tighten or regulatory pressures shift, availability narrows. Unlike mass-market gemstones with diversified sourcing, premium jade can experience sudden supply perception changes tied directly to extraction stability. Yet jade's response during global conflict differs from that of lapis or amber. Amber signals trade restriction. Lapis reflects symbolic authority. Jade represents portability with cultural conviction. Its strength lies in recognition within specific markets rather than universal liquidity. It does not need global consensus to retain value. It needs trust within its cultural sphere, and trust is powerful during uncertain cycles. An important question emerges. When instability grows, does capital seek globally recognized assets first, or does it retreat into culturally anchored ones? Those who observe regional gemstone markets closely often notice subtle surges in demand for materials tied to identity and heritage during uncertain periods. If insight from collecting, auction trends, or regional trade history offers a different perspective, share it below. Patterns in portable wealth rarely announce themselves loudly, but they reveal much about human behavior under pressure. Because jade demonstrates a fundamental principle. When systems strain, value often seeks forms that can travel quietly. And this is only the second layer of how gemstones respond when global tension escalates. Ranked 7th, Spinel, when the market realizes it was wrong. By the time instability reaches extraction zones, the conversation shifts again. It is no longer just about movement, no longer just about symbolism. Now it becomes about mispricing. Spinel has spent centuries in the shadow of another stone. For much of recorded history, some of the most famous rubies in royal collections were not rubies at all. They were Spinel. The Black Prince's ruby in the British imperial state crown is one such example, reclassified only after modern gemology advanced enough to distinguish between the two. That historical confusion matters more than it seems. Spinel shares visual intensity with ruby, but has long traded at a discount due to perception rather than intrinsic quality. In stable markets, that perception gap persists comfortably. But during periods of supply disruption, when true ruby sources tighten, attention turns towards substitutes. This is where Spinel reacts. When extraction from primary ruby regions slows or uncertainty surrounds output, collectors and dealers reassess comparable materials. Demand for fine red Spinel can rise not because it suddenly changes, but because the market reevaluates relative scarcity. Conflict does not create Spinel's value. It exposes the pricing imbalance that was already there. There is also geographic sensitivity. High-quality Spinel deposits are limited and often located in regions that have experienced political instability over time. When access narrows, the revaluation effect can compound. Spinel behaves differently from Jade. Jade represents culturally embedded portability. Spinel represents correction. It is a stone that benefits when markets are forced to look again, and markets look again when pressure rises. A subtle but powerful pattern emerges here. During instability, does value concentrate only in the most famous names, or does it flow toward overlooked assets that suddenly appear underpriced? Collectors with long memories often recognize these inflection points before broader markets do. Share a perspective below, especially if historical auction records or gemological reclassifications have revealed moments when perceptions shifted dramatically. Those turning points often coincide with larger systemic tension, because Spinel teaches a different lesson. Instability does not just restrict supply, it recalibrates attention. And when attention recalibrates, stones once overlooked can move quickly into focus. The layers are building now, from disrupted trade to shifting symbolism to revaluation under pressure. And the reaction is only intensifying. Ranked 6th, Emerald. When confidence wavers, tangibility gains weight. As instability spreads from trade routes to extraction zones, a quieter shift begins inside the market itself. Confidence softens, not collapse, not panic, but hesitation. In those moments, tangible luxury assets often regain attention, not as speculation, but as reassurance. Emerald sits at the center of that behavior. For centuries, the most celebrated emeralds have come from Colombia, particularly the Muso and Chivor regions. This geographic concentration gives emerald a dual sensitivity. It responds both to regional supply constraints and to broader shifts in global confidence. Emerald differs from Spinel. Spinel benefits from revaluation under pressure. Emerald benefits from visibility. Its color is unmistakable. Its history is royal. From Mughal carvings to European crowns, emerald has long signaled permanence. That reputation matters when trust in abstract systems weakens. Throughout modern history, periods of prolonged instability have often coincided with renewed demand for tangible luxury goods, assets that can be held, stored, insured, and transferred. Emerald participates in that cycle because it balances beauty with recognizability. There is also a structural factor. High-quality emeralds are relatively scarce in large, clean sizes. When supply becomes uncertain, the upper tier of the market tightens quickly. Collectors compete not out of panic, but out of anticipation. And anticipation is powerful. Emerald does not spike wildly in early tremors. It gains weight as instability stretches. It becomes attractive when uncertainty lingers long enough to make durability desirable. This marks a transition in the flow of value. Amber reacted to movement. Lapis reflected authority. Jade preserved portability. Spinel corrected mispricing. Emerald signals something more subtle. When confidence wavers, tangibility strengthens. Consider this carefully. During prolonged global uncertainty, do markets gravitate toward the rarest materials or toward those with long-established prestige and secondary market depth? Those who study auction history often notice that emerald's strongest moments are not sudden. They build gradually as hesitation deepens. Share an observation below if patterns in luxury auctions or historical estate transfers reveal similar behavior. Often, the most telling shifts are measured not in headlines, but in quiet bidding rooms, because emerald teaches a critical lesson in conflict dynamics. Value does not always surge explosively. Sometimes it consolidates steadily, becoming heavier as confidence becomes lighter, and the reaction curve is still climbing. Ranked fifth, Sapphire, when stability becomes the commodity. As instability stretches beyond weeks and into seasons, something subtle begins to shift in human behavior. The search is no longer for opportunity, it is for reassurance. Sapphire occupies a distinctive place in that psychological transition. Unlike emerald, whose appeal builds gradually through prestige, sapphire carries a long-standing association with stability, loyalty, and authority. Across medieval Europe and South Asia, blue sapphire adorned royalty and clergy not merely for ornament, but as a visible symbol of steadiness and moral clarity. That symbolism endures. Historically, high-quality sapphires have emerged from a handful of regions: Kashmir, Sri Lanka, Myanmar. Each source has experienced periods of limited output or geopolitical constraint over the centuries. When access narrows, supply sensitivity increases. But sapphire's reaction during global instability is not purely logistical, it is reputational. In extended periods of uncertainty, buyers often gravitate toward assets that feel familiar, historically validated, and widely recognized. Sapphire meets all three conditions. It is durable, second only to diamond in hardness. It is globally understood, and it carries centuries of embedded trust. Trust is a form of currency. Auction data across volatile decades has repeatedly shown a pattern. Classic blue sapphires, especially those with documented origin, maintain strong demand even when broader luxury markets hesitate. Not necessarily explosive growth, but resilience. And resilience becomes attractive when confidence weakens. This marks another elevation in the flow map. Amber responded to trade friction. Lapis signaled authority tension. Jade moved wealth quietly. Spinel corrected misperception. Emerald gained weight as hesitation grew. Sapphire does something different. It becomes a psychological anchor. When prolonged instability erodes certainty, the market does not always chase the rarest or the newest. It often consolidates around what feels time-tested. Consider this. In moments of sustained global strain, do collectors lean toward novelty or toward materials that have already endured centuries of upheaval? Observations from auction trends, estate transfers, and high-net-worth portfolios often reveal that during extended uncertainty, stability itself becomes the commodity. Share insight below if historical sales patterns or long-term collection behavior suggest similar cycles. Patterns of durability often tell more than moments of surge, because sapphire demonstrates a critical principle. In unstable eras, endurance carries premium, and the reaction curve is approaching its most sensitive phase. Ranked fourth, ruby, when value must compress. By this stage in the escalation, instability is no longer subtle. Trade has tightened. Extraction feels pressure. Confidence has thinned. Now behavior shifts again, when uncertainty deepens and stretches across borders. Portability becomes power. Ruby enters the picture here, not simply as a luxury gemstone, but as a high-value density asset. Few materials compress as much recognized worth into such a small physical form. A fine, untreated ruby of exceptional color can represent substantial value in a space smaller than a coin. That compression matters. Historically, the most revered rubies have originated from limited regions, most famously the Mogok Valley in Myanmar. When access to primary sources narrows, supply perception intensifies rapidly. Unlike emerald, whose appeal builds through prestige, Ruby reacts more sharply because its top-tier supply has always been narrow. But the true force behind Ruby's response during global instability is psychological. Red is not a passive color. Across cultures, it symbolizes vitality, strength, and protection. In times of prolonged uncertainty, materials that project intensity often gain symbolic appeal alongside their monetary value. There is also a structural dimension. High-quality rubies are rare in larger sizes. The market for fine stones is thin but global. When capital begins to move quietly across jurisdictions, compact assets with universal recognition become attractive. Not for speculation, but for mobility. This is not about volatility, it is about density. Amber reacted to shipping routes. Lapis reflected authority. Jade carried wealth across borders. Spinel benefited from recalibration. Emerald consolidated under hesitation. Sapphire anchored confidence. Ruby compresses value, and compression becomes critical when movement is uncertain. An important question emerges. During prolonged global strain, does wealth prioritize visibility or discretion? Auction history suggests that during extended instability, rare rubies, particularly those with documented origin and minimal treatment, often maintain intense bidding competition even when broader luxury markets soften. If experience with high-value gemstones has revealed similar behavior, share that perspective below. Observations about portability and cross-border transfer often reveal more about human behavior than price charts alone, because ruby demonstrates a decisive shift in the flow of conflict economics. When instability matures, value does not just seek safety, it seeks density, and the escalation is not finished yet. Ranked third, Tanzanite. When one location controls the clock. By the time instability reaches this stage, the market is no longer reacting to friction. It is reacting to fragility. Tanzanite represents one of the clearest examples of geographic concentration in the modern gemstone world. Discovered in the late 1960s, it is mined in a remarkably small area near the Marilani Hills of Tanzania. Unlike sapphire, emerald, or ruby, each sourced from multiple countries, fine Tanzanite effectively comes from one place. That concentration creates a different type of sensitivity. When global systems strain, diversified supply chains can redistribute pressure. But when a gemstone depends on a single region, even minor instability, regulatory changes, logistical disruption, or production slowdowns can shift perception quickly. Perception drives momentum. Tanzanite's appeal lies not only in its vivid blue-violet pleochroism, but in the widely discussed notion that its deposits are finite. Whether or not timelines are precisely measurable, the narrative of limited supply has long accompanied the stone. During prolonged global uncertainty, scarcity narratives gain weight. Unlike ruby, which compresses value, or sapphire, which anchors stability, Tanzanite introduces something sharper: vulnerability. Its entire high-quality supply exists within a narrow geographic window. When that window feels uncertain, buyers react with urgency rather than patience. Historically, gemstones with single-source dependency often experience accelerated demand when external pressure increases, not necessarily because supply has stopped, but because risk perception rises, and risk perception moves markets faster than confirmed shortage. This is where the flow map intensifies. It asks a different question. What happens when global instability intersects with geographic exclusivity? Auction data and private transactions have shown that high-grade Tanzanite can experience rapid pricing adjustments when uncertainty clouds extraction stability. Not chaotic spikes, but decisive repricing. If insight from trading or collecting reveals similar patterns around single-origin materials, share that observation below. Concentration risk is often underestimated until pressure exposes it, because Tanzanite demonstrates a pivotal principle in conflict economics. When supply is singular, perception becomes magnified, and the market begins to accelerate. Only two stones remain, and their reactions operate on an even broader scale. Ranked second, black opal, when rarity meets uncertainty. By this point in the escalation, instability is no longer regional. It is systemic. Trade routes have tightened. Extraction feels fragile. Confidence has thinned. Capital has begun to move. Now the market shifts into a more selective phase. Black opal represents this transition. Unlike many gemstones sourced across continents, fine black opal is overwhelmingly associated with Lightning Ridge, Australia. Its dark body tone and electric play of color create an optical intensity unlike any other gem. But beyond beauty lies something more consequential. True top-tier black opal is extremely scarce. Scarcity behaves differently under pressure. In stable markets, rarity is admired. In unstable markets, rarity becomes competitive. Black opal does not possess the universal liquidity of diamond, nor the centuries-deep royal association of sapphire. Its market is narrower, more collector-driven, and highly quality-sensitive. That very structure makes it volatile, but also reactive. When uncertainty spreads across financial systems, high-net-worth collectors often recalibrate portfolios toward tangible, finite assets. Not en masse, not publicly, but deliberately. And in those moments, stones with dramatic visual identity and limited geographic supply attract focused attention. There is another layer. Because black opal supply is relatively small in absolute terms, even modest increases in elite demand can influence pricing perception quickly. The market does not need mass participation to shift. It needs competition among a small group of informed buyers. This is a different dynamic from Tanzanite's concentration risk. Tanzanite reacts to fragility of location. Black opal reacts to intensity of rarity. It is less about logistics and more about selective acquisition. Consider this carefully. When global instability grows, does capital move broadly, or does it narrow toward the most visually distinctive, finite materials available? Auction history suggests that exceptional black opals often command fierce bidding during periods of extended uncertainty. Not because they are widely traded, but because they are rarely available at all. If observation of collector markets reveals similar patterns, share that insight below. Sometimes the most dramatic price movements occur in the smallest circles. Because black opal illustrates a late-stage principle in conflict economics. When uncertainty peaks, competition concentrates, and concentration amplifies value. Only one stone remains, one that operates across every layer simultaneously. In first place, diamond. When recognition becomes liquidity, at the peak of global instability, the market stops experimenting. It consolidates. Trade has tightened. Extraction has felt pressure. Confidence has weakened. Capital has narrowed toward rarity. Now a different requirement emerges: universal recognition. Diamond occupies a position no other gemstone fully shares. It is not the rarest. It is not geographically singular. It is not even the most visually dramatic under natural light. Yet when systems strain at scale, diamond consistently moves to the center of attention. The reason is structural. Diamond is globally understood. Across continents, cultures, and legal systems, its grading standards are codified. Its terminology is standardized. Its value is widely legible. In uncertain periods, legibility becomes powerful. Liquidity does not depend only on scarcity. It depends on shared understanding. Historically, during extended global instability, diamonds have functioned as compact, transportable stores of recognized value. Not because they are immune to market cycles, but because they are broadly accepted within secondary markets worldwide. Dealers exist in nearly every major city. Pricing frameworks are transparent. Verification systems are mature. No other gemstone combines portability, durability, standardized grading, and global resale infrastructure at the same scale. This is why diamond responds across every layer of the flow map. When trade routes constrict, it continues to circulate through established networks. When extraction faces uncertainty, global stockpiles buffer perception. When confidence thins, its recognition stabilizes transactions. When capital concentrates, its liquidity absorbs movement. Diamond does not react explosively in every crisis. It reacts comprehensively. That distinction explains its position at the top. Amber signaled early friction. Lapis reflected authority. Jade preserved mobility. Spinel recalibrated pricing. Emerald consolidated tangibility. Sapphire anchored endurance. Ruby compressed wealth. Tanzanite magnified concentration risk. Black opal intensified rarity. Diamond integrates them. A final consideration: when instability peaks, is rarity alone sufficient, or does recognition determine survivability? Auction archives and cross-border trade histories consistently suggest that in extended uncertainty, assets that are instantly understood across cultures maintain resilience. If long-term observation of global gemstone markets reveals additional patterns, share that insight below. The most instructive behaviors often appear not in sudden spikes, but in sustained trust, because diamond illustrates the ultimate principle of conflict economics. When systems strain, value flows toward what the world already knows, and recognition in uncertain times becomes its own form of security. Global instability does not invent value, it reveals it. Across history, when trade routes fractured, when extraction tightened, when confidence thinned and capital narrowed, gemstones did not all respond the same way. Some reacted to movement, some intensified under scarcity, some absorbed hesitation, and one endured because it was universally understood. The pattern is not emotional, it is structural. Value does not disappear during global strain. It concentrates, and concentration follows recognition. But here is the deeper question. Is the most resilient asset always the rarest one, or the one the world already agrees upon? History suggests agreement matters more than rarity. If observation of markets, auctions, or collecting behavior has revealed a different pattern, share that perspective below. Not predictions, not speculation, patterns. Because the most revealing insights often come from those who study cycles closely. In the next episode, the focus shifts from stones that gain value during instability to gemstones that vanish from global trade entirely, some for decades. Understanding disappearance may reveal even more than understanding resilience. Until then, watch where movement tightens. That is where value begins to shift.